Hi everybody, this is Frilioth and welcome to another Minecraft tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to build the easiest, the most simple villager breeder in 1.14.1. This thing is ridiculously easy. To build this thing, you're going to need a few beds. The more beds you have, the more villagers are going to spawn, the more babies are going to be bred. You're going to need a block of choice, which is going to form the perimeter around the side of the farm. You're going to need some torches because you want to light this place up. You don't want any bad guys spawning in here. And you're going to need some blocks for the roof, or glass blocks if you want to stop lightning turning them all into witches. So I'm going to build this inside one chunk. If we press F3 and G, you'll see that I've got my platform inside one chunk. And I'm going to build it inside a chunk because it just makes it easier. And I'll explain why in a second. So all you need to do to start with is grab your blocks of choice and just build a wall, a 2-high wall, or as high as you want. In fairness, can be as high as you want, but you do need to make sure that your villagers can't get out, and you can't put a door in here either because your villagers are going to be able to get through a wooden door. You put a metal door if you want to, but not a wooden one. So now you've got something that looks like that. This wall is there for a couple of reasons. The first one is it stops pillagers. It's going to stop the pillager raids from coming into your village and killing all of your villagers. And secondly, it's going to stop the villagers that are in here going outside into the chunks around the outside of it. And that becomes important in a second. I'll tell you about that in a second. So now what you want to do is take out your beds, and you need to put down some beds. Now, as I mentioned, the number of babies is determined by the number of beds in your farm. So if we were to get 2 villagers in here and only 1 bed, they would only have 1 baby in the day. If we put down 2 beds, they would have 2 babies. And each pair of villagers, each breeding pair, as long as they're fed and as long as they have got beds available, will have 2 babies per day. So if we were to put down 4 beds and we only had 2 villagers to start with, on the first day they would have 2 babies, and then they wouldn't have any more until the following day, until the beds had been reset. Then they'd have another 2 babies. Okay, but by then the 2 babies that they had previously would have grown up. They'd have probably had food thrown to them, or you'd have thrown food to them, and then they will have 2 babies, and the first pair will have 2 babies, and that will have used up all 4 beds. So then they would stop. And then the following day, when their babies had grown up, you'll have 8 villagers in here, or is it 8 pairs of villagers in here, who would all potentially be able to have babies, but you've only got 4 beds. So then you would only have 4 babies born in that one day. So you've got to be careful that, yes, you could potentially spam down in here 100 beds, and you would have an exponential amount of baby villagers. As long as you could keep them all fed, they would expand, or they would breed exponentially, and you would just have 1 million babies in here in no time at all. So be careful when you... I'm going to get asked the question, can I put down loads of beds? Yes, you can. If you put down loads of beds, you'll have loads of babies, but you really don't need to. You really don't need to. So I'm going to stick with having... we're going to put down 10 beds. Okay, we'll start off with 2 villagers, and before long, after a few days, we'll have enough villagers in here to breed 10 babies per day, which is going to be more than enough. You really won't need any more than that, especially bearing in mind that now you can choose the profession of your villagers. So what I'm going to do then, before I spam down the beds, we're going to need to put down, or we're going to need to dig down 3 blocks. Okay, so that's for 3 beds, 4 beds, 5 beds, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you need to dig a trench that's 3 deep and big enough for the amount of beds that you want to put in the breeder. So this is big enough for 10 beds, so I'm going to put my 10 beds down there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now you want to cover them up again, and it's important that you dig down 3 blocks. If you only dig down 2 blocks and put your bed in there and then cover it, the villagers are going to be able to get into there. They're going to still be able to access that bed, and then in the morning when they wake up, they'll be sat there with their head poking out of the ground. Okay, and you don't want that. So make sure you've got room to dig down 3 blocks and then completely cover the beds with solid blocks. So now we've done that, we can start bringing in your villagers. So you need to find a farm, a village somewhere, and bring them in on minecarts or on the in a water chute or in a boat or however you want to get them in here. But you need to get them in here. So once you've got your villagers in here and they're happy, but they're not fed. So there are beds available, but they're not fed, so they're not going to breed. So if we throw them a few stacks of carrots and they walk off, you boys are making me look like an amateur. Throw them a few stacks of carrots. They'll immediately start to breed. And within a few seconds, they'll have a little baby. There he is. Have we got time? We probably haven't got time. Let me set the time back today to morning. Because there is enough time. They will only breed between 0 ticks and 12,000 ticks. Okay, they won't breed overnight. So it's got to be day for them to breed. All right. Now there's a cooldown period, as I've mentioned before. These guys now won't breed again for another 5 minutes or so, another 6,000 ticks, which is why they can only have 2 babies in the day. And I want to show you the NBT files. Telling you about a little bit about this village. So these are the files about this village that we've just created. So you can see that it's in that particular chunk. It's in the world at -15, -13. That's the chunk coordinates, not the block coordinates. But you'll see we've got 10 records, and they're all homes. So we've got a home, we've got a home, we've got a home, we've got a home, and they've got free tickets apart from that one there. That's got a free ticket value of nothing. That's because we've got 1 baby in there. Okay. So currently there is potential in that village to have another 9 babies. All right. So if we whip back now to look at the breeding villagers again, you'll see that they're here happy as Larry on their little cooldown period. And after, as I say, 3, 4, could be 5 minutes. I think it's more likely to be 5 minutes. They'll start getting little hearts again, and then they'll have another baby, which will take up another one of those beds that we've hidden under the floor. Okay, so their cooldown period's finished, and they're back in the mood for love. And because there are 9 free beds directly below them, they're going to have another little baby. And there he is. And now he's having food thrown at him. So if we have a look at the NBT files again, you'll see that now we've got another entry that's got a ticket value of nothing. So we've got that one there. We've now got that one there. And you might be thinking, well, this is all well and good, but as soon as they've had 10 babies, they're going to stop having babies. And you'd be right if they could access their beds. And the beauty of this is that they cannot path to their bed. They know they're there, they can sense that they're there, but they cannot path to their beds. And that would be exactly the same if you were to put the beds in a sealed vault, so to speak. It's got to have a wall that is 2 blocks wide, otherwise they'll sort of TP through the wall into their beds. But if you put the beds inside a sealed building with no doors, with a 2 thick block wall, then it would have exactly the same effect. And if you put the beds in thin air, if I were to put the beds, let me do this. We would have put the beds there like that. They'll be able to see them. They'll have the babies, but they won't be able to path to them because there's no way they can get up there. Okay, and that's really important overnight. So if I set the time now to 12,000 ticks, they're going to now, the babies are going to now try to start finding their beds. They've been allocated some beds. They know where they are. They're underneath them. So they're trying to find their beds. And after a while, they'll get bored of looking for the beds and they'll forget about them. Now, this could take 100 ticks. This might take a couple of thousand ticks. But certainly before the following morning, they'll have forgotten about their beds, which means the following morning comes, these guys have got 10 more beds they need to fill. And let's just have a quick look at the NBT file again. Now, the babies have stopped running about, and there you go. If we look at the NBT files, the entries that had a free ticket or the ticket value of 0 have now gone back to having ticket values of 1. Which now means we have got 10 more valid beds in that farm. So first thing in the morning, these guys are going to get back in the mood for love. And as long as they're fed, they're going to have another baby. And then they'll have another baby at about 6,000 ticks. And then these guys are going to grow up. They're fed. They're going to start having babies. And then the babies for the following day are going to grow up. And they're going to have babies. And before you know it, this farm is going to be completely full. So if I now fast forward to the morning to 0 ticks, they've had all night to get back into the mood for love. And there you are, at 0 ticks exactly, they start making another little baby. And there he is. So that will keep happening. Now, these guys will grow up. These guys will have babies. Those guys will have babies until you get to a stage where 10 babies are born in the day. Now, during the day, if 10 babies are born during the day, no more babies will be born because there are only 10 beds in here. Okay, so once you get to the stage where you've got loads of villagers in here, you're going to get a lot of angry villagers because they just won't be able to have loads and loads of babies. Now, the downside of this particular type of farm is that all of these villagers are going to have food in their inventory. Obviously, if you wanted to put a farmer in there, you could by all means put a composter in there and put some farmland in there, and then it will self-perpetuate. You will just get a farmer in there feeding villagers. They'll have more villagers. They'll sleep overnight. They'll forget about their beds. They'll have more villagers, which would be great as long as you don't want to use these villagers in other farms. So if you wanted to use these in a potato farm or a wheat farm or a beetroot farm, you wouldn't be able to do it because they've got carrots in their inventory. The only way you could do that is if you stuck a couple or several pairs of villagers in a little pod, like we did with the 1.14 villager breeder, and then the babies fell down and didn't get fed, and then that would work just as well. So we'll leave these guys to just run around for a little bit and get ready for being back in the mood while I just explain some really important details that you need to know about this farm. So if we put the chunk borders back on again, the reason I built it inside a chunk is because you need to keep these villagers away from any other point of interest. Okay, and another point of interest would be a bed or a bell or a workstation. The points of interest need to be at least 48 blocks away from these guys, or 3 full chunks, which is why I've built this in a chunk. So if you build it in a chunk, make sure you have 3 full chunks between that farm, the wall, the perimeter of that village, so to speak, and another point of interest. If we were to put down beds here or workstations here, if you've got a trading hall here with workstations in it, potentially those guys will take one of these workstations. So make sure all of the workstations and points of interest and bells and everything else are outside 3 full chunks, or at least 48 blocks. And the beauty of burying the beds or putting the beds out of reach so they can't path to them is you no longer need to take these baby villagers 160 blocks away for them to forget about the bed. They do it overnight. So if they had a baby now, you can take those babies, even though one of them is allocated to a bed, you could take that baby now and you could whip him away 48 blocks, and then overnight he would forget about the bed. And then the following morning, these guys could start breeding again. But you need to make sure that the villagers cannot path to the bed. Okay, so bury it 3 blocks underground, or put it in a room that's got no doors, but it's got 2 blocks. It's got to have a wall. It's got to be 2 blocks thick, because villagers will TP through 1 block to get into a bed. Okay, so make a building that's 2 blocks thick with beds inside it, or put them in the air. Just build a little tower and then build the beds in the air. But as long as these guys cannot path to them, they'll forget about their beds overnight. So I'm just going to leave this running for a few Minecraft days, and then we'll see how many villagers we get in there. So as you can see, this is the morning on the 4th day, and they've missed it about all night. And if we have a quick look over here to the left hand side, we've now got 10 vacant beds again, and these guys are straight in the mood for love, and they're going to start having little babies. So we're just approaching the evening of the 4th day, and as you can see, we've got 9 babies running around in there. I have not counted them actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 babies running around in there, and if you look over on the left hand side, you'll see that the files show that we've got 1 free bed, and the other 9 beds, which associate to the 9 villagers, the 9 baby villagers in the middle, have been taken. Now these guys are frantically running around trying to find their beds now. It's night time, it's dark o'clock, they've got to go to sleep, they're looking for their beds. In a minute they'll get bored of looking and they'll stop dead, and they won't move again for the rest of the night. So we're now at about 14,000 ticks or so, and you'll see they've stopped running around. If we look at the files over here, if I refresh these files now, all of the beds have been reset, which means that tomorrow morning all of the breeding pairs of villagers will be able to have babies. Now, because we are now at the maximum number of beds we have under the floor, this breeder now will have 10 babies every day forever. It'll just keep, as long as they're fed, they will just keep having 10 babies every day, which is why you really don't need to have any more than 10 beds in there. If you were to have, as I mentioned before, if you were to have 20 beds in there now, you will get 20 babies every day. But you don't need it. You really don't need that many, and you'll be very popular with server owners everywhere. You'll max out the mob cap. You just don't need to do it. So don't do it. Don't be that guy that has a chunk full of 200 villagers when you really don't need it. So as the moon sets behind me, we start the 5th day for these guys, and they're suddenly going to burst into life, and all the adults are going to run around trying to make babies. So now we'll have 10 babies every day ongoing, which would be fantastic. There they go. They were off and running already, which is great. But remember, don't be the guy that just has a million villagers in one chunk. So let's just run over the main points of this again then. Each breeding pair of villagers will have 2 babies per day, up to a maximum of the amount of beds that you've got available, and then the beds will reset overnight as long as the baby villagers cannot path to the beds. So make sure that the beds are buried at least 3 blocks underground, or they're inside a building with a double block thick wall, or they're in a tower or suspended in midair. Anywhere that these babies cannot get to them, they will forget about them overnight and they will reset, which will allow the adults to have more babies the following day. Make sure that you don't build any other points of interest within 3 full chunks of the walls of this breeder. It's the village no longer exists, as I've mentioned before, so you can't really say sort of 48 blocks away from the centre of the village, because the village itself is centred around the individual villager. So any other points of interest need to be at least 3 full chunks away from any of these villagers. Make sure you put a wall around the side of the farm, a 2-high wall, so they're safe from pillagers or zombies. Make sure you light it up to make sure nothing spawns in here. Make sure you put a roof over the top of it, because you don't want these guys turning into witches if it starts thundering and lightning. And remember that this will only work if the chunk is loaded. So if you build it in a spawn chunk, it will always be loaded and you will have loads and loads and loads of babies. I mean, this won't, you can't turn it off. The only way to turn this off is to stop feeding them or to break all of the beds. So if this is in a spawn chunk, it will work indefinitely. If it's in a chunk that's not a spawn chunk, it will work whenever you're close enough to have that chunk loaded. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, everybody. I hope you've learned something new about villagers. If you have enjoyed it, please don't forget to leave it a like. And if you've really loved it, don't forget to subscribe for future videos. This is Frilioth, and I'm out of here.